This happened about 10 years ago. I was a student at the time, attending a local university. While living alone, my apartment became the hangout for all my new friends, and so I usually left it unlocked so they could come in at any time. It wasn't uncommon to arrive back home after work and find all my friends already there waiting in my apartment. I know that's perhaps a really dumb thing to do, but I grew up in the countryside, and I was used to not locking my door anyway. I didn't really care at the time. I remember it must have been sometime in the fall. All the leaves were turning brown, and it was starting to get much colder at night. I was on my way home from my part-time job. When I arrived home, I found one of my friends asleep in my bed already. I was pretty shocked and a bit annoyed. Sure, I gave them permission to come and go as they pleased, and I was more than happy to have them around. That was fine and all, but taking up my bed without my permission? That was a step too far. I had a sofa in my room for my friends to crash on. I guess I never specifically said that's where they should sleep if they were staying the night, but isn't that pretty obvious? Oh well, I thought, don't let it bother you too much. I'll let him sleep there for a little while longer, I guess. I set up the sofa bed and got ready for bed myself. I looked over to my friend laying in the bed. He had the covers pulled all the way up over his head, so I couldn't tell which friend it was. I could only see the very top of their heads sticking out. I started eating the dinner I'd picked up from the convenience store on the way back, and I finally called out to my guest. "Hey, you ready to move over now?" There was no answer. I got in the bed to let him sleep a little while longer. I was gonna kick him out of the bed after I finished my bath. I got dried and changed up, giving him a little extra time to get the hint, but my friends still hadn't moved. In fact, they didn't seem to have changed positions at all in all the time I'd been home. I was getting really annoyed now. "Come on, man, move out of my bed now. I set up the sofa bed for you. I want my real bed back. Time to move." As I approached my friend and called out to him, my friend pulled his head all the way underneath the covers. "Whatever, come on, are you really gonna be like this?" I said. He just kept pulling the covers over his head more and more. All of a sudden, he started acting really weird. He began to violently toss and turn underneath the covers in my bed. I stared at my bed in confusion for a while. Something didn't look right here. There was clearly the shape of a person in my bed, but they seemed a bit larger and bigger than any of my friends. I was starting to get a little bit concerned. It was as if someone had been hiding in my bed sheets. None of my friends would do that unless they were playing a prank on me. I half expected them to jump out at me and scare me, but the joke had gone too far now. I called out all of my friends' names. Again, no response. I started to think this wasn't just someone playing a prank. I was getting really anxious, and my hands began to shake. I felt a strange new sense of fear I had never experienced before or since. My lower back went ice cold. I summoned up the courage to directly confront whoever was there. "Hey, why aren't you saying anything?" A small part of me still believed that must be one of my friends in the bed, a very small part. As I drew closer, I heard the moving sounds become more frantic beneath the covers. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come up. As I finally got to the side of the bed, I saw the forehead and eyes of a person slowly emerge from underneath the covers. Their eyes glared at me. They were wild and filled with hate. It almost felt like they were burning me. This person was staring straight at me, but it was not one of my friends. I'll never forget those eyes. I felt faint as I stared into them and knew immediately they did not belong to someone I knew. Their eyes looked so crazed I wasn't even sure if they belonged to a human being. After that, I can't remember much at all. I just remember running out the front door to the local convenience store. I called up some of my friends who rushed there to join me. We called up our other friends to make sure it wasn't any of them either. Who the hell was that in my bed then? We called the police and they came to the apartment to check it over. They called back and said they couldn't find any traces of anybody there. Ever since that incident, I always make sure to lock my doors and windows. I shudder when I think about just how long I was alone in that same apartment with that unknown person. My best friend had a daughter named Sarah that just turned 7 years old. I would occasionally watch her whenever they needed. They lived in a really nice house in Washington, surrounded by trees and mountains. The nearest neighbors were a couple of miles away, so I always enjoyed the peace and quiet while staying there. Anyways, my friend had asked me if I could watch Sarah for about 2 days. She had to go away on a business trip, I guess. I agreed, and a few weeks later arrived at the scheduled date at her house. We talked for a little bit and ate lunch together. Then she finished up her packing and headed out to catch her flight. I hung out with Sarah for a few hours, listening to her talk about school and her friends and all that sort of thing. Then I took her out to pick some dinner and dessert up. We got back to the house around 8 or so and agreed to watch a movie just before bed. I sat down on the couch and began scrolling through a list of movies to find one that would be good for both of us. That was when Sarah suddenly asked me, "Who's that?" I looked to where she was pointing and saw there was someone at the front door. I could hear someone knocking. With the house being so isolated, I never thought anyone would come up to the door. I nervously walked over and cracked the door open just a tiny bit. There was a tall man standing on the porch. He actually looked fairly surprised when I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked. He leaned to the left, looking through the crack in the door, then replied, "Sorry, just making sure someone was home." Then he turned away and started walking. Obviously, I found this interaction very strange and more than a little bit creepy. I shut the door and locked it behind him, then went to the back door and made sure that was locked as well. Sarah asked me who that guy was. I told her it was just a neighbor, then went back to the couch and started a movie we both enjoyed. The movie was a bit longer than I thought it would be though. I told Sarah it was time for bed, then followed her upstairs as she got ready. Once she was all tucked in and laid down, I came back down and sat on the couch. It was a little bit after 10 now, and I wasn't too tired yet. I figured I'd turn something on the TV and just wind down for a bit before going to bed myself. As the TV started to play though, I started to hear a crunching sound coming from somewhere. I muted the show and listened a bit more carefully. The sound seemed to be coming from the back of the house. I went over to the back door and turned on the back porch light. Looking around, I couldn't really see anything other than an empty porch with trees in the background. I stayed there listening for a few more minutes before eventually heading back over to the couch. I wondered if maybe my mind was just messing with me, as I was a little creeped out by being in a house surrounded by a forest in the dark already. I always felt safe during the day and actually really enjoyed it, but as soon as the sun went down, I'd always get a little bit uneasy. I turned up the volume again and decided to lay down as to get myself a little more sleepy. Apparently it worked too well though, and I fell asleep almost immediately. A couple of hours later, I was awoken, noticing the TV was still on. I turned it off and sat up, rubbing my eyes tiredly. But then I started to get an uneasy feeling again. I noticed how silent it was in the house. There wasn't any sound at all. I began to hear that same crunching noise, but this time clearly sounding like footsteps. It was coming from the right side of the home, right by the room I was in. A few seconds later they stopped, seemingly right outside one of the windows that had the curtains down. Truly frightened at this point, I walked over to the window slowly and quietly and pulled back the curtain. Nothing was there. I looked around and couldn't see anything. I figured I'd just been imagining things. I was really tired after all. I got a glass of water and headed upstairs to go to bed. The next morning, I made us some breakfast, and we sat down together to talk about what we wanted to do today. As we were discussing plans, though, Sarah asked me why I was walking around outside all night long. I froze for a moment and asked her what she meant. She said she had heard someone walking around the house for hours just after she had gone to bed. Chills ran down my body, and I told her to stay inside while I went to look around. I grabbed a small knife just in case and went out the front door. Walking around the house, it was a bit hard to tell if anything was amiss from last night or if it had already been there sometime before. I did notice some strange scratches on the walls though, near some of the windows and doors. Other than that, everything seemed to be normal. I couldn't tell if there were any new footprints in the yard, as it was mostly made of thick grass. As I made my way back to the front door, I saw that very same man from yesterday walking down the street in front of the house. He was just walking past, but again, this house was really far from anything else in the area, so he had to have walked a couple of miles at least just to get here. I went back inside and told Sarah we were going to go to the mall today and walk around for quite a while. I really didn't want to be in the house anymore. I wanted to spend as much time away as possible. We stayed out for a while and didn't get back to the house until 6 o'clock. My friend called me soon after, just to check up on us. I mentioned the strange man I had seen and described his features to her. To my surprise, she said she actually recognized that man. A few weeks ago, apparently he had come up to her house and asked if he could stay the night, to which she had obviously declined. We agreed that if anything else happened, I wouldn't take any more chances and would call the police right away. As the sun started to go down, I made sure to check all the doors one last time to make sure everything was locked up. It was around 9 p.m. and Sarah and I were playing a board game before bed when we both started to hear a soft tapping noise coming from one of the windows. I stood up slowly and told Sarah to stay calm. A loud scratching came from outside the walls of the house, right by the window in the room we were in. I grabbed Sarah and ran into the garage. We got into the car, and I backed out of the driveway as quick as I could, making sure the garage fully closed before driving off. I couldn't see much in the darkness as we were leaving, but Sarah said she saw someone running into the trees behind the house. I pulled into a hotel parking lot eventually and called the police to report the incident. Then I called my friend to let them know what happened. We were met 10 minutes later by 2 officers at the hotel. They informed us that 2 more were at the house looking around. I told them everything and gave them a description of the man. Eventually, they left as well. We ended up staying in a room at the hotel for the night. The next morning, my friend called and said her flight was just landing and she would be back in an hour. We headed over to the house. We waited in the driveway for her to arrive. Then we all went in together to make sure it was safe. I stayed for a few hours just to inform her about everything, then said goodbye and went home. It was definitely one of the scariest things to ever happen to me, but fortunately, the man was caught a short time later after having been reported by multiple people for skulking about their homes. What scares me the most about that guy, though, was that he never said what his reasoning was for his actions. He had apparently broken into one of the homes, but didn't steal anything at all. He just looked around for a while, then left empty-handed. It always makes me wonder what he was actually trying to do on the night he tried to break in. Hey everyone, I'm a 20-something-year-old female from Europe. This story involves my friend and I. My friend I'll refer to as Charlotte. We met when I was 9 years old, and she was 7. We went to the same school, and she lived on the same street as me, so our paths often crossed. When I was 13 and she was 11, we were both allowed to make Facebook accounts. It was our very first social media platform, so we were really excited. My parents monitored my account, but Charlotte's parents didn't bother to monitor hers. I didn't really think anything of it at the time. Before I continue this story, I want to clarify that in my country, we go to high school at age 11, and we don't have middle school, so to speak. And that's how we attended the same school at the same time, in case anyone has a different education system. One weekend afternoon, we were playing in the park, just the two of us. We were sitting on the swings when Charlotte told me she had a huge secret she wanted to tell me. She told me I had to swear to never tell anyone else. I was intrigued, of course, so I asked her to tell me what her secret was. She told me she had a boyfriend. When she told me his name, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. She told me his name was P. Gold. I didn't believe her because that name sounded so stupid, and we had no boys in our class with a nickname like that. She looked hurt, and I felt bad for laughing, but I couldn't help it. I asked her what the P stood for, thinking it must have been a boy in our school. Instead, though, she told me he didn't go to our school. This made me even more convinced she was fibbing. We had another high school within driving distance, sure, but I didn't think she knew anyone from over there. I probed her for some more info and told her I was sorry for laughing. It's just that he had such a silly name. She got on her phone and told me he was an older boy. Immediately, that felt weird to me. As a 13-year-old, I was way more aware of these sorts of things than Charlotte was. I let her continue with her story, though. She explained that they had met on Facebook after he randomly sent her a friend request. She'd accepted because she thought his profile picture was cute. I asked her what this guy looked like, and she described him as being tan with floppy dark brown hair and brown eyes. She said that his profile picture was an avatar that looked pretty much the same. She thought it was so cute, so she accepted. Then he sent her some real-life pics of himself. When they got to chatting, apparently he was 18 years old and studying in America at a fancy college due to winning a scholarship. I don't know anything about American colleges or college admissions in general, so at the time, nothing sounded weird about this to me. I did tell her that he seemed kind of too old, though. She said it didn't matter because he was kind to her, and he saw her for her true self. She said they had been chatting every night after school for 2 months now, and reminded me not to tell anyone about this. She didn't want her parents finding out. I agreed not to say anything. I know that was wrong of me, but again, I was a kid myself. I do really regret not saying something right away, though. The coming week, Charlotte invited me to her house after school one day. Once we were in her bedroom, she brought out her laptop. She wanted to show me this P. Gold. I was ready to see him, too. His profile picture looked fairly normal, and his page wasn't empty or anything. I noticed he had 200 friends. I didn't know if that was normal or not because I only had my classmates on my account due to my parents monitoring all of my activity. Charlotte didn't bother showing me the rest of the stuff, though. Instead, she went right into their messages and let me read some of them. He was always telling her she was such a great friend to him and that the best part of his day was talking to her. How lucky he was to have such a sweet girlfriend who was as cute as she was. I thought that was very nice of him, but I was still feeling a little bit weirded out. I mean, Charlotte would be turning 12 soon. This seemed like way too big an age gap. I couldn't fully grasp that a normal 18-year-old would never be interested in a 12-year-old anyway. In my mind, it was all about the number of years between them still, and not so much about how vastly different a 12-year-old is from an 18-year-old. I asked what his real name was, but Charlotte insisted it was P. Gold. I told her that couldn't be right. That sounded like a pimp's name or something. She became grumpy and told me not to insult her boyfriend. Looking back, Charlotte started to grow distant around that time, but I didn't realize it just then. She stopped wanting to hang out after school with me or other friends. Since we still chatted in school though, I didn't realize something was wrong. We both had mobile phones and they obviously weren't as glamorous as they are nowadays, so we only texted on them occasionally. Eventually, Charlotte stopped texting so much altogether though. She stayed home all the time. I imagine in her room talking to this P. Gold. I can't remember how long had passed by, but Charlotte told me one day that their relationship was super serious. I asked her how things were going, and she told me they were taking it to the next level. I thought that she meant that they were going to meet up finally. I was honestly desperate to know all the details. Instead, what she told me made me feel sick. She told me that she and him had begun making love. I knew what that meant, and I thought she was telling me they had met up in person and had sex. She told me they were only sexting at this point though. I didn't really understand what that meant. She said on Facebook he'd message her all this sexual stuff that he wanted to do to her, and she'd respond back saying what she wanted to do with him. This was making me feel really uneasy. I told her this sounded way too weird. She was getting defensive again and told me I was just jealous I didn't have a boyfriend yet, and the boy I liked would never want me. I was really hurt by that and told her to go away. We eventually had a falling out. Typical teenage drama. I was way too mad to dwell on the P. Gold situation. Anytime I found myself thinking of it though, I would get uncomfortable all over again. We did eventually make up a short while later. I remember that we both apologized to each other. She told me that the virtual sex stuff had begun because P. Gold said he wished they could kiss, and Charlotte said she wanted that too. He had also begun sending her all sorts of porn and stuff. I had never actually seen porn at the time, so Charlotte showed me a video of it on her laptop. I had no idea how her parents were not discovering what she was looking at. I felt a bit weird for not liking all this when Charlotte seemed perfectly okay with it. I didn't ever tell anyone about what was going on, and another month passed by before I got any more updates on the situation. One day, Charlotte took off from school. We didn't see each other for a few days because she wasn't there. When we finally did meet up again, she told me she was heartbroken because her boyfriend had broken up with her. I asked why and tried to console her. She told me he just randomly blocked her out of nowhere. I didn't know what to say. Maybe something had happened to him. She was really upset and I didn't really like that. But a part of me was kind of relieved that she wouldn't be talking to this guy anymore. As far as I'm aware, he never tried to reach out again. We ended up falling out of touch as the years went by, but as an adult now, this whole situation deeply troubles me. I failed my friend by not telling anyone. At the end of the day, I wonder what Buster Gold here's deal was. Was that really his name even? It really did sound like a fake name. He was probably catfishing Charlotte with his photos. I always wonder if he was ever caught and disappeared due to going to prison, and that's why he just blocked her and disappeared one day. Her parents were really reckless with her online safety. I really hope what happened doesn't weigh heavily on Charlotte's shoulders, but I have a feeling it probably does. This short story happened to me about 10 years ago, and whenever I stop and think about it, I'm reminded just how messed up people are in this life. About an hour from my house was going to be a Mortal Kombat convention based on the video game, in case you don't know what Mortal Kombat is. I'm a massive fan of this franchise, and during this period of my life, I was playing a ton of games. Even though I was excited about the convention, what I was most excited about was that they were going to have a big Mortal Kombat gaming tournament. I don't have a lot of skills to brag about myself, but one thing I am good at is Mortal Kombat. I begged my girlfriend for a while, and she finally agreed to go with me, a decision she still regrets to this day. The day finally came and we arrived early so I could sign up the form about the game tournament. I had to register early to participate and needed to fill out some stuff upon arrival. After I met the spokesperson, my girlfriend and I checked into our hotel, which was right across the street from the convention center. The hotel was probably the only thing I wasn't too crazy about. It was old, dark, not clean at all, and the price wasn't great either. I figured that was because of the close proximity to the event though. When we were checking in and walking to the room, we saw many less than friendly characters walking around the place. We started to feel more comfortable when we arrived on our floor and saw a bunch of people our age, all wearing Mortal Kombat memorabilia. As sketchy as this place was, at least we were in it together with all these other fans. We rested for a little while, then made our way to the convention, which was very awesome. We spent many hours checking out art, meeting actual voice actors and game developers. At 7 p.m., the tournament was about to start. I had a blast and won a few rounds even. I then got eliminated in a later round. I wasn't even that upset though, because I was having so much fun. I ended up making some friends that I'm still close with today. The one bad thing that happened at the convention though was that while I was on stage going one-on-one with an opponent, my girlfriend was just sitting in the crowd, basically watching and being a good sport. She ended up getting approached by some guy cosplaying as the character Cabal. She was initially nice and told the guy his costume was cool, even though she didn't really know much about the game, and just wanted the interaction to end. Unfortunately, the guy refused to leave her alone. After I was eliminated, I made my way back down and saw the guy just following my girlfriend around. Not being one for direct confrontation, I put my arm around her, kissed her on the forehead, and asked if she wanted to grab some food. The guy got the hint at least, which I was hoping would happen. He started to wander away, kind of humming to himself. It was honestly a bit weird. The rest of the night was fun as well. We sort of hung out for a while after the convention with the new friends I had made. We all decided to go out for a drink and ended up staying at the bar until 2 a.m. When we got back, I laid right down since I was really exhausted. My girlfriend was now wide awake after going to the bar though. She was energized and was really hungry. I told her the food options around here were quite slim, but I did remember seeing a vending machine down the hall just past the elevators. I gave my girlfriend some cash and told her to go grab a bunch of snacks she wanted. She left the room, only to return less than a minute later as white as a ghost. She said she was looking at the options on the machine, when a very quiet voice whispered from behind it, "Hey, good to see you again." She was so frightened she turned around and ran back down the dark hallway to our room. I must be a horrible boyfriend because I didn't actually believe her. She's a naturally jumpy person and gets freaked out easily, so I thought perhaps she was just hearing things due to how much we'd both drunk that night. I told her I would walk down there and grab the snacks for her, give it a check and see if anything was really wrong. I didn't have a shirt on since I had been getting ready for bed. My girlfriend had taken off her zip-up sweatshirt, so I slipped that on and walked down to the vending machine. I'm not gonna lie, the dark atmosphere of that hallway was really off-putting. I put $1 into the machine, but before I could put in any more money, I heard an aggressive voice whisper from behind it, "Hey, don't leave this time." Before I could even react, a hand emerged from behind it and grabbed my arm. I jumped back and they let go. Standing in the shadows of that dark room was a guy wearing a long coat with the sleeves cut off. He had long, straight black hair. I exclaimed some sort of profanity while he stared at me. Eventually, he just said, "Sorry, I thought you were someone else. I'm waiting here for a friend." I was able to put the pieces together. He was waiting for my girlfriend. I just turned around and ran back to my room. I looked back one more time. He was just standing at the end of the hallway. The image of his horrifying demeanor was still burned into my brain. When I got back to the room, I called the police, who must have been right outside the building because they arrived in what seemed like seconds. They were so fast the guy didn't even have time to get away. They caught him and escorted him out of the hotel. Not in handcuffs, though they did slam him in the back of a squad car. It was a long couple of hours after that, between answering questions, talking to staff, and overall just trying to calm down. We couldn't sleep at all and decided to check out early. While my girlfriend was gathering everything in the room, I made my way over to the vending machine to finally grab those snacks. Curiosity caused me to look behind the machine. Laying on the floor was a cabal-like mask, the same mask of that man from the convention the night prior. Somehow, this person from the convention had stalked us back to our room. Whatever his intentions were, I know they weren't good. I didn't tell my girlfriend about the surprise find, since I figured it would only serve to scare her even more. I don't know what happened to that cabal impersonator. I just hope we never cross paths again. This happened to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job. My sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m., she heard a loud knocking on her back door. She went over to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door, asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her badly and he was down the street searching for her. My sister was hesitant to let her inside, especially since she had a newborn baby in the home. She didn't want to interfere either. She told the lady the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister not to call the police and to just let her inside. This is where my sister started to get suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, though, the lady was already gone. The police arrived a few minutes later and told my sister that the same situation had happened a few streets down. Apparently, a woman and man were going door to door doing this in order to get inside people's houses. I'm sure this is a very common tactic, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew really creeps me out. What would have happened if she had just opened the door for her that night? I guess I'm glad we'll never have to know. When I was around 16 years old, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in that house as we were packing everything up. At some point, I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read, something I used to do quite a lot when I was a young kid to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes under the stairs. It went back around 8 feet, then at a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot-high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this was the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour in, I shifted over a little to get comfortable when I heard a low, warped voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped out. I hit my head on the low ceiling and practically broke the door down getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left in my face, I went back to see what it was that made that sound. Turned out it was an old stuffed bear from when I was around 3 or 4 years old that I just happened to lean on and press right on his belly. When I pressed his stomach again, though, there was no sound at all. I guess this poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power and its dying breath to tell me I made it happy. Well, you made me happy too, little bear. Well, when you're not making me piss myself in terror at least. I sleep in a one-bedroom apartment, and every night I close my door because I don't have windows in my room, and I love the pitch-black darkness that ensues. I drift off and snooze for however long, then start to stir. I casually wake up as my eyes adjust to the darkness and check my phone and lay it back down to sleep some more. As I'm laying there, I open my eyes and see a face. It was in the doorway of my now slightly cracked open bedroom door. The face was at the height of a child, I believe. It took me a minute to really gather what I was looking at. I could only make out the roundness of a little face and black beady eyes. The lips were shadowy but still visible. Whoever this was, they just kept sort of swaying ever so slightly, like they were trying to spy on me without being noticed. I just looked at them, and after a long time being fully exhausted, I fell asleep all the way. When I woke up, it was deep into the morning. I gradually sat up, stretched, then looked at my phone. I remembered that creepy face I had seen just a few hours ago. I thought it was an interesting and scary experience. It must have been a bout of sleep paralysis, but that had never happened to me before. I then sat up a bit straighter and looked over to my door, which I realized was still cracked open. I'd never gotten up during the night, and I remembered that I had for sure closed my door before I went to sleep. I've told people this story, and they just tell me, yeah, right, or that's creepy. It was a weird situation for sure. I guess I can easily attribute the face to maybe still being sort of asleep, but the door being open, that's something I can't quite put my finger on at all. To start things off, I've always been interested in paranormal and extraterrestrial topics, but I've personally never been much of a believer in them. That is, until I had some strange experiences of my own. This story I'm about to tell you is one that's had a significant impact on my life. Let me give you some information on the location where this occurred. This happened in San Antonio, Texas, at a church I go to. It splits into 3 sections. There's a semi-wooded grassy area, the sanctuary, and the children's building in the middle that sits on a small hill. Then, finally, the parking lot. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get on to the story itself. In November of 2014, me and a few other volunteers from my church had a sleepover on the property. The following events occurred around 5:45 in the morning. Me and my friend Caesar were by the fire pit that's located in a thicker part of the wooded area close to the gate at the back of the property. Caesar went back to the children's building to get some coffee while I was sitting there by the pit. I looked up to the night sky and saw a bright light moving in an eastward direction. At first, I thought it was a satellite, but then I realized it was far too big and bright to be one. It couldn't have been a plane or a helicopter either, because it was not blinking or making any noise, despite being so low to the ground. I decided to get up and follow this thing. That is, until it disappeared into the horizon. As I was walking back to the pit, I saw Caesar standing at the top of the small hill that borders the concrete and grass area. I told him what I'd seen, and he said that maybe it was a satellite or something, just as I'd thought initially. In the middle of the conversation, though, there was what sounded like an animalistic screech coming from the other side of the fence by the fire pit. It didn't sound like any known animal we were familiar with. The cries rang out for a full 30 seconds or so, before everything went dead silent. We stayed quiet for about a minute before I finally broke that silence. "Hey, you want to go back to the pit?" I nervously asked. He said sure. We sat down on the chairs by the pit, and as we sat, the sleep started to win me over. My eyes slowly started to close, and I would nod off until I decided to screw it and take a nap with my eyes closed. While they were closed, though, I began to hear what sounded like distorted sounds. I was trying to figure out what could be causing this noise. It wasn't my phone, and it wasn't Caesar's either. As I was thinking, it suddenly clicked that whatever was making this noise was now only inches from my face, it seemed. I snapped at the direction of the sound. It wasn't there. It was behind me now. I turned around to see if it was there. It wasn't there either. I was looking around frantically. Finally, it became clear to me that this noise seemed to be coming from every direction around us. Caesar looked at me like I was going crazy. He asked me, "Are you okay?" I jerked my head towards him and said, "Shh, do you hear that?" He looked very confused and tried to listen in as to what was going on. He began to look around. "I don't hear anything." After he said that, the noise only got louder. "Oh, I hear it now," he said. We grabbed our flashlights and began to look around the property. The trees were creepy, and the leaves no less so. No one was outside with us. The neighbor's dog had started barking non-stop at something. We knew it couldn't be barking at us because we were too far for it to care about our presence. We were pretty used to that dog, and we knew something had freaked it out. We began to slowly walk alongside the fence. I began to notice something. Each time we took a step, I heard what sounded like something else taking a step with us. When we stopped, it stopped. I would quickly snap my flashlight to where the steps were coming from, but I couldn't see anything through the cracks in the fence. We walked nervously back to the fire pit. While the noise kept going on, Caesar asked me what could be making that sound. "I don't know," I said. "Something might be toying with us." After I said that, the noise just stopped altogether. It was as if whatever was making this noise had their cover blown, and they'd taken off. We were stunned about what happened and decided to go back inside. By this point, it was around 6:15 a.m. When we told everyone about what just happened, they were concerned and ultimately prayed over us. Our director said not to concern ourselves about it anymore. Honestly, that was the first time something like this ever happened to me. I'm not exactly sure what to think about the events. Call me crazy or insane, but I hope to experience this one day again, just to be sure it actually happened. I highly doubt it ever will, though.